Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Laura Jeffrey, and I'm the librarian here at Wolfson. And this morning I'm joined by my colleague Connor Johnston, the academic skills librarian, and we're going to be talking to you about building your bibliography. So we're going to be looking at this from two different sides. One is the literature searching, getting everything together that you're going to be able to resource and reference during the course of your research, and then also managing that. There's no point finding thousands of useful articles if you can't then draw on them when you need to, when you come to the write-up stage. So we'll split this into two halves. We'll take a little break in the middle, and there'll be opportunities for hands-on exercises just to put some of this into practice. But obviously, if you've got any questions after today's session, then please do get in touch with either of us, and we can go through some of these elements again one-to-one and perhaps a little bit more tailored towards your particular needs. Okay, so Connor's going to kick off and I'll hand it over to him.
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, as Laura was saying, it's going to be split sort of into two halves. The idea here is to take your bibliography right from step zero to a big, beautiful looking bibliography. So yeah, I'll get started with literature searching. So the things that I'm going to go through are kind of going over the basics. I think these are the things that are really useful to go over. And then maybe going through some more advanced searches using Boolean operators. I'm going to talk a little bit about AI and then how to evaluate the sources that you get as well. And then I'll pass on to Laura. We'll go through different referencing software, Zotero, and different styles as well. So to get started, I think the reason why we're talking about literature searching, even though it might be a case of you think, oh, I'll just go on iDiscover and search for the thing I need, actually, when you're starting an essay, it's quite normal to feel quite overwhelmed by all of the different options. I mean, in Cambridge, there are something like over 100 different libraries, I mean, thousands of different resources. If you go into the databases, there are hundreds of those. Same case with all the journals and things. There's lots of different resources to go through. So I think that feeling of overwhelm is something shared by quite a lot of different students. Because having a lot of choice is very good, but then you might not know where to start, and you might feel anxious about getting the very best readings as well. Of course, there's only so much time in the day, you can only read so many different articles. You would like to choose the ones that are best for you. So how do you do that, when you are feeling this sort of like avalanche of readings over you? So the important thing is everyone is feeling this way, and we're not born knowing how to do all of this stuff. And the good news is that we're going to be going through it today. So getting started. This is going over the basics, which I think is really important because it's always the simplest things that kind of get out of our heads after we start to learn more advanced skills. It's the things that are even just getting started and looking for a specific book using iDiscover can sometimes fall through the cracks. Um, so, of course, if you are looking for a specific book, learning how to use iDiscover, putting in the author and the title. If you have any difficulty contacting me or Laura, this is the very like building blocks of looking for your book. And then also, in terms of like going over the very basics, what I would encourage is browsing the shelves. You might not know that your shelves are all organized in such a way that like similar subjects will be grouped together. So if you go to a book that you really particularly enjoy, it's quite likely that on that same shelf, you will have lots of different books that are relevant to you. I know when I was a student here 2 years ago, I sort of had the English section, and I had a sort of sense of ownership of that section a little bit. When I arrived, liked looking around all the different sections, and yeah, familiarizing myself with the physical space of that part of the library that, in a way, kind of belonged to me, and that I felt like I belonged to as well. And another part of that is also your subject librarian. I don't know if you know this, but like your faculty librarians will often have sort of specific expertise in those subjects as well. I had a friend while I was doing the masters who every single essay had to be passed through her faculty librarian, and was an enormous help as she went through. Um, and yeah, so another person that can help as well is your supervisor in terms of recommending reading lists, but they'll also have other recommendations to expand on any essay question you might have. So yeah, if you're feeling like I don't even know where to begin, then actually you don't have to do all of this on your own. I think importantly, you do have lots of people at your sort of service a little bit. But a good way to get started is if you have maybe a core reading, that you have to begin with, um, just then reading the bibliography of that book is a really good place to get started. Or it could be the bibliography of an article or a book chapter or whatever it is. You really like the content of the whatever it is. You go to the bibliography, it'll have an incredible list of all the seminal works in that subject. And so you can sort of hop from bibliography to bibliography and sort of have that chain of citations and find and create a reading list a bit that way. Um, Similarly, reading articles that have cited a seminal work, again, this is sort of working backwards with the citations as well. And then there's also in iDiscover, you'll see at the top of iDiscover on the website, they'll have a few different like tabs that you can go to. One is the journals, and so this is something that you should definitely go and look through. Um, just to be aware of the different journals that are relevant to your subject. And it's a similar case with the databases as well. So this is if you go into iDiscover at the very sort of like home page, it's right at the top, just above the search bar. And you'll see journals and you'll see databases as well. So if you haven't already, I know I didn't until way too late in my undergrad, um, just have a little look and see what's available to you. Um, Okay, so before we get started into sort of more advanced searching, one thing that's really useful to download is something called the Lean Library. So this is a browser extension that allows you basically to see immediately what you have access to, even when you're off campus. Okay, so sometimes it can be quite hard, especially when you're off campus and you don't have that sort of like university network that sort of goes through to the article quite quickly. It can be quite frustrating, navigating through really interesting articles, and then you find potentially you don't have access, or you spend a lot of time, taking that title and putting it into iDiscover, scrolling through a lot of different material, and wasting a bit of time doing that sort of admin. So this is just like a quality of life thing to add really simply. It's totally free and super simple to include. And it'll just, so when you're on a PDF or maybe you're on Web of Science or Google Scholar, it'll just really simplify that process, creating the link for you directly, and you just click on it and you're there a lot quicker. Um, so that is something we highly recommend. Um, if we just keep going. Yeah, so we're going to move on to advanced searches. So you may have seen this advanced search sort of button in iDiscover and wondered what it does. And going into it, you don't sort of understand all the different buttons and complexity of it. Sometimes it can be easier just to say, oh, I'm just going to put everything into the normal iDiscover thing. But actually, doing an advanced search can create some really powerful and really niche searches where you only get the thing that you need and truly nothing else. Because although iDiscover is incredibly powerful, it also searches through a legal deposit library. And what that means is that it gets basically a copy of every single book in English, pretty much within reason. So there are hundreds of thousands of things that you can find in iDiscover, which is incredible. But again, a big mountain of resources to dig through. And so going through the advanced search can make it even more niche, especially if you have quite a specific question. Um, so I'll show you what it goes to when you click advanced search. This is what it kind of looks like. So you've still got at the top here, you can click um, to look through either the libraries or online resources or everything. So you can see if I just go back, that's the same as the regular search. But then what's different about this is that you have these search filters in the middle here, and they've got searching through any field. So that could be like author, title, whatever. That's the thing that is searching in. And then the search term on the right, that's where you would put your sort of query, the thing that you're looking for. So say it's like modernism or Jane Austen or whatever it might be. And then it has the Boolean operator on the left. So I wanted to show you this before we get into Boolean operators to show you where this type of stuff gets used. Because I was researching Boolean operators and I thought, well, I actually don't know where I would put those Boolean operators. But actually, it becomes relevant when you look at these advanced searches. And so you can understand where you would potentially put the different things that we're going to learn. Okay, so if this doesn't make sense now, it sort of will more when we look at what Boolean operators are. So stay with me. So a Boolean operator Basically, Boolean operators are things that can help you make a search even more specific. So if you are searching for different things about peanut butter and jelly, for example, it's a very American example, but this is sort of the sort of go-to example that we use. So if I use and between the key terms peanut butter and the key term jelly, if I put and between them, it will only come up with things that have both of those things together at the same time. So you can see in the and section, it's narrowed it down quite a lot. The only thing that's coming up is this grey section that's in the middle. So that's a way to really narrow down a search. If I use or, that actually expands it. So I get even more searches. So if I put peanut butter or jelly, what I get is things that only have peanut butter, things that only have jelly, and things that have both as well. However, for not, you can see it quite simply, it excludes everything that has jelly in it. So I get everything that has peanut butter in, but I don't get the things that have jelly in that even do have peanut butter in. So it excludes some searches of peanut butter. I hope that's making a bit of sense. So to sort of tie that back into what we were looking at with iDiscover, you can see you would be putting your searches, your key terms, sorry, into where it says enter a search term, and then you would be narrowing down or expanding by adding the Boolean operator into this part where it says and already. You can click that and choose either or not, and it can really make the search a lot more niche. Um, so how do you sort of apply this to your own research question? So how do you identify essentially the key terms of your research question? So I've got an example here. Um, the one that I've got is how does social media influence the mental health of adolescents? So I hope it's slightly clear which elements of this research question would become the key term. I think in terms of your own research question, it is about looking at the things that you would see as maybe the nouns or the things that are, particularly relevant rather than all the connecting words. And also as well, I've got this sort of abstract on the right hand side of the PowerPoint, and this is just to say as well that if you're reading lots of different articles, um, which you will be, of course, writing your essay, that actually underneath the abstract, quite often they will have a list of synonyms and a list of extra key terms that you can use. So I've pulled up this article that is relevant to how social media influences the mental health of adolescents, and actually really usefully for me, it's got all of these indexed keywords that are relevant to what I'm searching. So adolescent, anxiety, coronavirus, culture, health disparity, internet literacy, things like this. So we're going to take 2 minutes for you to think about potentially your own research question and then to come up with what the key terms of those might be. Okay, so we'll just take a little moment for you guys to have a think, to write out your question, and then to identify what elements of that question would be the key term. Okay? Okay. I don't know if anyone wants to share their research question potentially, or if you've got your sort of question in mind and the key terms ready, then we can move on. Um, Okay, amazing. So now that you've got your key terms, how do you then combine them? We've gone through what the and, or, and not all do, but how do you actually then combine them? So I've just got some examples with the question that I was using earlier. So a really sort of basic search, I would do social media and adolescence and mental health. I want all three of those things to pop up at the same time. But actually, I understand that maybe adolescence has a lot of different synonyms for it, so I want to be able to include all of those as well. So I'll put social media and adolescents, or teenagers, or young people and mental health. And that way, I'm not missing, um, articles that maybe don't mention adolescents but do mention teenagers and young people, for example. And then maybe I make this search and it's incredibly advanced and it's incredibly niche, but actually a lot of things are coming up about gaming that is not relevant to my research or television. And I specifically want social media. So in that case, um, I want to put social media as the first one, and then not gaming, and then not television, and then etc. etc. So that's an example of how I would personally construct that um, research. So I hope that makes a bit of sense with how you to use Boolean operators. Most databases will have an advanced search button. Yes, Matthias, if you'd like to unmute or put it into the group chat.
Oh, yeah, I just want to ask, like, can you combine like two or more like Boolean operators? Let's say I use and, but then I don't want to bring in gaming and television. Like, can I specify like social media and adolescents and mental health, but exclude gaming and television? Like, is it possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what you can get with Boolean operators is what looks like a very, very long list of different things that you can make it as niche as possible. So yeah, absolutely. You could say you want social media, you want adolescence, and then have, it can be up to, I don't know, I don't know if there is a limit in fact, but you can exclude whatever you'd like, essentially. Yeah, absolutely. So, if I go
Yeah, I
back
think, sorry,
to,
just to chip in, I was just going to say,
yeah.
I had a student recently who was doing a kind of systematic search and it had sort of over 50 search terms. And the way they got round it was doing lots of this or this or this or this or this. And they did a huge search for just a load of synonyms. And then they did another massive search for another load of synonyms on their two search terms. And then eventually they combined those two searches at the very end. So if it's getting too messy, you can just do all your synonyms and you'll get, thousands of results because it's this or this or this. It could be any of those things. But once you combine them, that's the point when you reduce it down. So yeah, I agree. I don't know if there is a limit, but I think you can definitely push some of these databases quite hard.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, here on the initial page on iDiscover, it looks like there's just the one place to add a Boolean operator. But actually, if you press this little blue add a new line, you can keep on adding and adding. So that's the place to add more lines. And yeah, as I was saying, a lot of different resources will have a section for an advanced search. So you'll have the sort of like basic, just putting in the title, which will come up first of all, and then somewhere on that page it'll say advanced search, and that's the place where it'll come up with being able to put in Boolean operators. I think in Scopus it might even actually start out with Boolean operators. Um, but yeah, so it's more common. Um, so there's going to be some extra tips that I would like to leave with you. These are sort of extra to Boolean operators. Some of these you might have heard, some of them you might not. But anyway, the search tips are first of all to use quotation marks. This will allow you to find results where the two words or however many words you put within the quotation marks only appear right next to one another. So, for example, I was searching social media. I might not want just media on its own to come up or just social to come up on its own. I want them to come up as a pair to search specifically social media. The same I could do similarly with mental health. For example, I don't want health to come up and confuse the search with physical health, for example. I want it only to be mental health. So you can do that by adding quotation marks. Similarly, if you add an asterisk, um, you can use something called truncation, and essentially that is you take the root of the word and then add a little asterisk, and it will find all sort of variants of that sort of root. So, for example, I've got this example of deforest, which has a bunch of different variants on it, like, for example, deforesting, deforestation. And so if I just put deforest asterisk, what it actually does is searches all of those different things. So there might be a temptation to you know that there's like minute differences that you could potentially put in with deforest, and then you complicate potentially the advanced search with adding all of those things. Actually, you don't have to do that. You can just add the asterisk, and it makes it a lot simpler. And then the final thing that I would highly recommend to narrow down the research is to set a date range as well. And this is something absolutely, I think 99% of databases will allow you to set a date range. and this will narrow it down even further so that you're only finding relevant articles. Okay. If I push on. So we're going to talk about using AI a little bit. So the three ones that are particularly good for literature searching that I would like to go through at the moment are Research Rabbit, Litmaps, and Elicit. Okay, so we'll go through sort of the risks and the opportunities, but if you have any questions, do let me know. Okay, so we'll just sort of have an overview of what each of them do. Research Rabbit is essentially um, citation searching. So what it does, if you start with a article that you particularly like, it will then show you all of the ones that that sort of like references, and then you can essentially hop from um, bibliography to bibliography, and you kind of go down this rabbit hole, is the idea. That you start with one thing and you end with, it could be in the thousands, expanding and expanding from the one article. So this is a really interesting way to find articles. Of course, citation searching is something that people have been doing always in, research, and Research Rabbit, of course, makes it a lot simpler and quicker. So it might help you to find articles that you might not have done through keyword searching, for example, because it's going through these sort of like specialist and expert bibliographies created by researchers rather than, going through just specific keywords. And you can also within Research Rabbit create collections as well, which are really useful because when you're writing an essay, you can put it into one specific collection, or for example, if you're doing a PhD thesis, you can collect them by chapter, and they're all in sort of discrete sections. So those are all the good things about Research Rabbit. The risks involved with Research Rabbit depend on the seed that you add at the beginning. Depending on the quality of that, it may lead to dubious or maybe not peer-reviewed things potentially. And also, it will always steer towards literature that is well connected because it is searching through citations. Always, it's going to be, pushing you towards things that are cited a lot of times by a lot of different researchers, and those things get privileged in something like Research Rabbit. So you might potentially miss some less cited works. So Research Rabbit is one that I highly recommend, I think, but of course using in conjunction with other things. Litmaps is something that I would use if you're a very visual learner. So what's really cool about Litmaps is that it will show you a sort of a state of the field of study in a really visual way. So the things that are cited a lot turn into really big bubbles, and then they're connected by these lines by smaller bubbles and smaller bubbles, and it'll show you sort of yeah, the relevance of certain articles. Again, prefers things that are well connected, but shows it in a way that also shows the things that are potentially, less cited, that are tangentially related. Um, and you can also create the map in such a way that it goes chronologically. So it'll stretch it out and it'll put like the dates along the left. And so you can see in a way how papers evolve over the years, and you'll see that really visually laid out. And so this is a really good one if you need a broad overview. If you're looking at, maybe you're not looking at specific details, but you're looking at how these things have changed over time, or you're looking at maybe doing a literature review. It's a really good way of getting a first visual impression of what's going on. Downsides of Litmaps is that there are different tiers that are paid and that are not, which I think is the case for a few of these. And for some people, this is an extra step that actually doesn't add much. In terms of upgrading your own research process, you need to sort of reflect and maybe say, okay, what is useful for me? What am I actually working on? As I said, Litmaps is really useful in these specific cases where maybe you need a broader overview. But actually, if you're doing a sort of, maybe it's a 2,000, 4,000 word essay, and you need a very specific topic, then having this sort of visualization of a field broadly may be overwhelming, and you actually need to keep it to something like 10 to 15 papers and working just solely on that. So being aware of what you're using these different things for is really useful as well. Um, the final one I want to go through is something called Elicit. So this one is the one that is potentially more contentious in that it summarizes and extracts detail and it will give you a sort of like quite detailed report about the thing that you give it. So this is the one to use potentially with the most caution to make sure it's not doing any work for you. However, it can be a really interesting way to search for different papers that are relevant to you because it does such a complex sort of search with it. Um, as it says here, it'll use AI to sort of assist the search that you give it, finding relevant papers, even if the keywords don't match, and it'll interpret your sort of like natural language question into essentially a highly Boolean operated thing. But again, you don't have control of that. And yeah, it pulls out the key information and it'll generate you a report. So tell you sort of give you almost like an abstract, if you like, about what you're searching. Um, so again, as this is a generative AI tool, the accuracy can't always be relied upon. Um, and of course, it may hallucinate is always an issue with these types of things, but it can be a really good solid base to start from if you are in this, white blank page panic phase. Maybe getting a sort of sample abstract on the thing you're working on can be a kickstarter to getting the ball rolling, at least. So these are all things that I personally have used in different situations that I also would say that have their limitations and I definitely wouldn't use in isolation. But if you haven't heard of them before, or maybe you're interested in them, I think it is worth having a play around with them and seeing if they can fit into your sort of literature searching process. Um, so with that all being said, as I said with Research Rabbit, you can get, an enormous amount of different articles that you don't fully know the authority of. Evaluating sources is a really useful tool. So we're going to go on to that next. So we're going to go through 4 elements to evaluating sources with PARA. It's publication date, authority, um, the relevance, and then the accuracy. Okay, so we're going to start off with publication date. Um, these are all simple things to sort of like go over the basics of understanding what maybe makes a source sort of reliable and something to use in your essays. But again, it's always the simplest things that do bear repeating because these are the things that sort of slip out of our minds. So with the publication date, does the time period that the information was published matter in relation to your topic? So say, for example, especially in history, these things can change very quickly over time. I mean, even 20 years ago, historiography of a certain time period may change significantly over the course. So understanding the context in which the article was written can be really important. And so always paying attention to the year that the article was published is really important. And then also, just in terms of the relevance is whether the links that are included in the article, are they current or are they broken? If they're current, then it's really good. But if they're broken, you might want to, take a step back and wonder again, what is the relevance of this article? So the authority is the next one. This refers to who wrote it. So can you actually tell in the first instance who wrote it? And is the author identified? If it's not identified, can you see whether the sponsor, the publisher, the organization, for example, are the author's credentials listed? So knowing who wrote it can be really important. As I said, the historical context of an article is really important because there may be a certain movement that's happening or a certain sort of historical moment that affects the content of the article. In the same way, there might be the biases from the person itself. So maybe if you know that a certain author has a certain, bias or bent writing, then knowing who the author is also really important. And whether they're from accredited university, what the sort of level of their research is. Um, then relevance, this can just be down to whether or not it's unique or not. Can you get this information from somewhere else? And is there a better place to go to sort of like justify one of your paragraphs? You don't want to use a article that is not sort of yeah, the sort of seminal text on the thing that you're justifying. Does it draw an original conclusion? These are all really important things to see whether or not you actually want to use this article and not a similar article that is just better. Um, and then finally, accuracy. So this is, evaluating the sources that they use, whether they list their sources in the first place, whether the research is original, um, can you verify it with your own information? So, you guys as experts in your own subject will have a basic understanding of what they kind of should be saying. So, does this make sense in your sort of broader context of what you know about the subject? And also, the tonally, it can be maybe slightly ideologically biased in some ways. And these are all things that you need to be wary of when reading certain articles. When you get to a certain point in the article and you think, ooh, maybe this is you know using slightly rhetorical language, it's not the most objective, then that might be a time to stop, pause, and to look around for different articles and seeing if this one um, you know is good enough for your essay. So of course, these are things that can be kind of intuited, but it is interesting and important to sort of reiterate just so that everyone knows exactly what you are looking for in a good source that you would like to put into your bibliography. Um, okay. If I, yeah. Okay. So that's everything from me pretty much. Just to recap all the things that I've gone through. Um, If you are feeling anxious about searching for literature, just know that that is a quite normal feeling that a lot of different students feel, and that yeah, there is no shame in feeling that overwhelmed because I think you'd be crazy not to sort of be a bit boggled by the amount of choice that Cambridge has in terms of research resources. So just come for help. You have lots of people here to support you. Um, so yeah, don't feel alone in that process. Um, so going back to advanced searches as well, it has those two elements that are really important. First of all, identifying the search terms and then combining those with the Boolean operators. So again, itself quite simple, just involves knowing what the Boolean operators will do. Um, and then, of course, all the tips that we shared. So phrase searching as well with the quotation marks, truncation with the asterisk, lean library is a really useful tool. Other search tips. Having a little play around with those AI tools that I showed you, that's something that is going to be something that either works for you or doesn't. So it's a case of really exploring and having a go, and then of course making sure of the quality of those resources once you've got them all, and reading them in the first place. Okay, so I think we'll take maybe a 5 minute break, if that sounds right, Laura.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so we'll come back at 5 to 11, just a chance to stretch the legs and get away from the computer for a few minutes. Okay, so we'll get started with the second section of this workshop, which is specifically looking at kind of managing all those references. As Connor said, there's so much out there for you to look at. There are so many different resources, and chances are you're going to feel quite overwhelmed by it. So the most important thing for you is finding what's relevant, and Connor's given us some great ideas for kind of how to narrow down that search, whether it's actually kind of technically when you're doing a search, or whether it's kind of when you're being critical and you're thinking about actually, yeah, how relevant is this? I found something, it looks good, but I'm going to have to make a decision about whether or not this is something I need to read. So there's those ways of kind of managing what you're finding. But really the most important thing is once you've read something and found something that is useful, you need to be able to find it again. And particularly for those of you who are working on a dissertation or a thesis and you're conducting this research over many months or even years, then the concern is that you're going to remember it while you're reading it. A couple of months down the line, you're going to forget which article had that fantastic citation in it, fantastic quote in it, or maybe there was a paper that had a brilliant table of figures and you just can't quite remember which one it is. So a lot of this comes down to note making, and we'll be looking at that in our next workshop. But more often than not, it's having a really good system that orders everything that you found, means that you can go back to it, find it again really quickly, and then when you come to write up, it's really important that you can get those references and those citations into your work in a really efficient way. I meet with a lot of students who do this all by hand, and that's absolutely fine, and it's a great skill to have, but it's super time consuming. And what we really want for you is to be able to focus on the content of your research, to think about the writing, to craft the writing, to think about having some, to have some great ideas and be able to work out how to get those into your thesis, your dissertation, your essay, whatever it is you're working on. Not worrying about where the full stop goes or where the brackets go. And there's some fantastic software out there that can help you in that management phase, but also in that kind of production of the bibliography as well. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at that. I'll do some demonstrations, and then there'll be some time at the end for you to have a go at working with this software, either installing it or just looking at what options are available to you. This is very much the sort of thing that people come and see us one-to-one about. Sometimes it's really just helpful to sit with us, to get it all set up on your machine, to have a go at getting things into your bibliographies in a kind of playful way, so that when you actually come to do some writing that matters, then you don't have to worry about the kind of technical side of how the system works. Okay, so yeah, why do we have reference management at all? Yeah, as I said, there are different reasons why we might want to kind of consider a more efficient way of working. One is so that we know what we've read. And this is also a big problem. Like Connor said, you might be searching Google Scholar, you might be searching Web of Science, you might be searching JSTOR, you might be looking for stuff on iDiscover. If you're doing it again over a long period of time, sometimes it's difficult to remember whether or not you found that article before or not. And sometimes you can start reading something and you get about a third of the way through and think, hang on, I think I've already read this. And that would be, again, a real waste of your time. So having a really good foolproof system where you can double check whether or not you've found a reference before and whether or not you've read something is a really, really good idea. Reference management is also, of course, about working out, where our notes came from, not just having kind of a scattergun approach where we're writing down great ideas. Sometimes there are ideas, sometimes they're the ideas have come from the author of a paper or a book. And in those cases, that's when plagiarism can happen. Just because we've got a slightly chaotic system and it's not super clear to us who wrote something, who came up with that idea. Are these words mine? Have I paraphrased something? Have I summarized something? Or actually, have I just taken it verbatim from an article? Maybe my system doesn't make that clear. So having a really good system for managing our notes and our references means that hopefully we can avoid being accused of accidental plagiarism. There are also conventions, there's kind of rules to how we produce research as well. So we have to kind of think about whether or not we're writing for our department. It might be the wider discipline, that there are kind of conventions to whether we have in-text citations or footnotes. And it can vary from the kind of destination of our research as well. So if you are producing a journal article, different journals will have different citation conventions, and they might expect you to format things in one particular way. You might submit something and it might be rejected. You might rework that paper and then want to submit it to another journal that has a completely different referencing style. That's, again, a lot of work for you if you're going to do everything manually. So if you can use some software that at the flick of a button can switch between these different conventions, again, it's a huge time saver. So in lots of cases, lots of the tips that we give out to you are to enable you to kind of find the research process as smooth as possible, so that the really knotty, difficult stuff, the kind of content generation, the writing side of things, you've got the most time available to do that. So reference management software is first and foremost, a place to store things that you've discovered. You may never read them, and that's okay, but you might look at something and think, I'll keep that for later. So it's kind of a bookmarking service, really. You can just download things that you think might be useful to you. You then can also store all the bibliographic information. And when we're talking about, our bibliographies and citing, we need to make sure that we've got all the data there, so that when we come to write up, we've got the author, the name of the article, the journal it came from, how many pages in that journal, or which issue, which volume of that journal. Have we got a URL? Because there's nothing worse than coming to write up and thinking, I'm missing some data here. I can't actually produce a proper bibliography because there's bits of information missing. And we had a master's student, not this summer, but last summer, who was a part-time student. So they were living remotely from Cambridge, and they had to come back to Cambridge. And for 3 days, they literally ran around the city tracking down books that they had read, months previously, because they actually just hadn't taken very good, notes and very good records. So that's one of the reasons to get this bibliographic information in. And this software can do that automatically in at least 95% of cases. It also can keep that bibliographic information with a PDF. So it means, again, we can retrieve things really quickly. For those of you who use a PC, and a kind of the file storage system isn't brilliant, it's very linear. Things have a specific place to live. And actually your notes may not be kept proximate to a PDF, of the same article. And that's kind of, again, going to take you time trying to track stuff down. You can also keep your notes alongside it as well. So your ideas, your reflections. So there is very much a storage element to it, but for me, the kind of magic happens when you integrate it with Word, or LaTeX if you use that as a STEM student. But primarily today, we'll be demonstrating it in its context of working with Word. And in this sense, you can cite as you go along. It will input things automatically, and it will build your bibliography for you. So we'll look at kind of how that looks. Now, there's lots of products out there. There's kind of 3 big ones: Zotero, Mendeley, and EndNote, which are generally used in the university, but you might come across something else as well that you find useful. We try not to be too prescriptive, but we do generally support Zotero within the library, partially because it's open source software. It's constantly developing and evolving. There's a fantastic community of people out there who can answer your queries and your questions if things aren't quite going to plan. But in most cases, they're very, very similar, and they look kind of the same, and you can sort of move between them. And actually, if you start working with one and then your supervisor says, actually, I'd rather you worked with a different one, in most cases, you can just export anything that you've downloaded into one piece of software and import it into another. So the work isn't lost. In most cases, you'll find you have a desktop version. And then there's also an online version or a web-based one, which means you can easily back things up. So that's really important as well, because obviously this could be many, many years worth of work and searching. So making sure you're backed up is super important. Like I said, they integrate with word processors, and you can normally import things into your library in lots of different ways. So again, I'll demonstrate this, but you can do it while you're searching the web. If you've already quite a long way through a research project and maybe you've got a folder full of PDFs of all the things that you've read, then you can just drag and drop those in. You don't need to go off and search for them again. And also you can just search directly from within the software as well. In most cases, well, you can collaborate with others. So if you're working in a lab, or if you've got a kind of collaborative group of PhD students working under a single supervisor, then you can generate shared bibliographies and you can all add things into those. That also works quite well for reading groups and things like that. So there's opportunities as well. It's not just kind of you working on your own. So yeah, lots of kind of add-on features, but today we'll just look at the basics. Okay, so at this point, I am going to come out of the PowerPoint slide and start doing a live demo. As I said, we kind of primarily support Zotero, so that's the one I'll be looking at today. First of all, you just need to Google it. It's freely available. And that's the nice thing. Something like EndNote is potentially, well, has a kind of reputation for being a little bit more powerful, but that is tied to your university username and password. So when you leave the university, you will lose access to EndNote. So at that point, you would need to export it anyway into one of these open and free pieces of software. So when you go to the Zotero page, there's a nice big red button on the front page. It wants you to download this. And as you can see, it's available for Mac and for Windows and for Linux. And it's kind of quite clever that it knows which system you're working on. So it will give you the opportunity to download Zotero, and this is the desktop version. It will also provide you with the opportunity to download a connector as well. And this will vary depending on which browser you prefer to use. So in this case, I'm on Firefox, but if I was on Chrome, you would see the little Chrome symbol there, and you can download it for multiple browsers. I certainly have lots running simultaneously, so you can do that too. And when you download it for Windows, it will also download a little add-in to your Word program as well. So again, I will show you kind of what that looks like. So it's definitely worth getting everything set up to begin with so that it's nice and smooth when you're moving between the different products. Okay, so this is what a Zotero library looks like. When you first open it, it will of course be completely empty. There'll be nothing in there because you are going to build your own library. And that's what it's called. It's called My Library. So you can see this link on the top left-hand corner there, My Library. And I don't know if you think this, but I often think that this looks a little bit like email. So this looks a little bit like my inbox, you know, with a great long list of things in it. And then on the left-hand side, I've got a series of folders. Again, a bit like my email. The difference to this is, well, the theory is with your email, you should be trying to reduce it all the time. You know, the ideal would be just to have a few things that you're currently working on. This is slightly different. So you can have a useful book or journal article, and you can move it into different folders, but you will see it never disappears from this central My Library. So unlike an email, where once you filed something, not only does it disappear, it only lives in a particular folder. In this case, I might have folders relating to themes or to specific sections of my thesis, and I could put a book into several of those because they might be relevant. Equally, you don't have to create that folder network. You can just work off this long list. But as I said, if you're working on a really big project, that can get a little bit overwhelming over time. Things that are also a little bit different, you've got some tags down the side here. So it might be that you have lots and lots of tags, things that link to different themes in your thesis or different authors or time periods that you're looking at, but they don't kind of deserve a folder all to themselves. So there are different ways that you can find things. And I think that's a really nice thing about reference management software compared to, say, just taking your notes in a Word file. That kind of, again, will live in a single place. The beauty of this is that you can come at your research from lots of different angles. Okay, so when we find something that's useful to us, I'm just going to, there we go, and we add it into our library, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. On the right-hand side, you can see all the bibliographic information that has been automatically imported into Zotero. You get to see what sort of resource it is. It's a little book, and the icons on the left-hand side of this central pane vary depending on what sort of resource you're looking at. If I scroll down just a bit further, you can see here I've got something that's a letter. I might have something that's a legal resource, a podcast. So I can change that. If for some reason I import something and it comes in wrong, maybe it was on a web page, but actually it was a podcast that I was wanting to record, I can just scroll down and I can change that type of resource. But in this case, it's got it right. It knows it's a book. It's got the author in there. There might be two authors, so I can add in more information if that hasn't been imported accurately. And I just need to think about when I'm going to cite this, what sort of information do I need it to collect? There's always a little bit of housekeeping that needs to be done. Just double check, have I got a publisher, a place of publication, a year? Or if I'm looking at a journal article, Again, you can see here the type of the item type has changed. Have I got the volume, the issue, the pages? Yeah, I've got all the information I'm going to need. If for some reason when you import something it's missing that, then your bibliography is going to be wrong in Word. So you just need to kind of keep on top, and that's a nice little job to do at the end of a busy day. If you've been doing lots of literature searching, just go through everything that you've imported. It's quite easy to do that. You can just order it by the date that it was added. So if you knew that you added something today, you can check that, or if it was 6 months ago, you could check that. But and generally you can order, by date, by the creator, so we can A to Z by authors, or we can A to Z by the title of the work as well. So if something hasn't got a title, it would be there at the top. So that's the kind of really basic way of just getting things into our library and organizing them. How do they look? What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the whole process and then give you time to have a bit of hands-on activity, simply because a lot of this, different people come at it from different perspectives. So how do we actually get things into here? There's lots of different ways. So one is, like I said, is the drag and drop system. So if I just kind of collapse everything, I might have a PDF on my desktop that I want to get into Zotero, and then I literally pick it up, drag it, open up my library, and just find that gap between two resources. It just takes 1 second there to import it, as you can see. So first of all, it came in as like an item, but without any bibliographic information. And then just within a few seconds, it'd gone off onto the internet and found all the information that related to that. So you can see that that is here. You can see that I've got a PDF attached to it. I can double check and see if the information is coming correctly. I can see that a little bit of kind of code has come in here that would have perhaps put the title in italics. So I'm just going to take that out because I wouldn't want that to appear in my bibliography. I haven't got an author, so I'd want to open up that PDF and find out, who wrote this. Oh, it's Philip Baker. So I need to go back in and put in the author. So like a lot of the information came through, but not all of it. And that's the kind of housekeeping that I'm talking about. Okay. Oops. Okay, so that is a way of getting things into your library. Another way to get things into your library is by searching. So as I mentioned, when you download this, you download a little bookmarklet, and I'm hovering over it here. It's in the top right-hand corner, and you can see it says Save to Zotero. Now this little icon will change. So rather than it being like a Z, this add-on changes every single time you're on a different type of resource, which is a little bit confusing. But I might conduct a search, in this case on information literacy and higher education. And because I've got lots of results on my page, you can see there's lots of different items. That little icon has changed to a folder. So if I click on that, it'll show me everything that's on that page. And I might want to say, those ones look really useful to me. I will save them and it will save to my library. That is a useful way of doing it, but of course there I'm just literally going on what the title looks like. So it might be that actually in lots of databases I want to go into it in a little bit more detail. Sometimes there's an abstract. In this case, yep, I can see there's a little bit of information what this book's about. Yeah, it still looks really useful. So I am actually going to download this. And now we're looking at a single item. You can see that that little add-on has now changed to a book. So I will add that to my library as well. When I open up Zotero, usually it highlights the item that you have just brought in. So again, I can have a look. I'm not sure, I don't want all that information there about next to Joe's name. They're not actually an author, they're an editor. So a little bit of housekeeping to be done, but generally that information has come in quite nicely. And just quickly to show you what that looks like again on a database like Web of Science, that little bookmarklet again, we've got lots of things on the page. We've got the folder, or I can go into a specific record and it changes to a journal article icon. And just to point out while I'm on here, Connor mentioned earlier about citation searching, Something like Web of Science or Google Scholar are really good at that. You can see here that it's highlighted. 78 people have cited this since it was published, and there's 104 things in their list of references, which you can follow up and do some of your backwards and forwards searching. So you can see how these two things like tie in really, really nicely, because you're always dipping in and out of different databases. The final way to get something into our Zotero library is using this magic wand, which is quite nice. And if you've got a specific identifier that's unique to that, so often that's not a title or an author, but an ISBN for a book, that's the number on the back by the barcode, a DOI, a digital object identifier for a journal article. So if we go back to this article, I can copy and paste that DOI and I can add it in using that magical wand there. It's brought in the full text for me. I can check and it's got everything there. So there's lots of different ways to get things in. Just use whatever works best for you or depending on your particular circumstances. Okay, so that's getting things into our library. I'm going to take a pause there before I show you how we get things out of our library and we get them into Word. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, just see if there are any questions and just give everyone a second or two to kind of breathe on that. You might want to just go online, just have a look at Zotero or Mendeley, see if you can download it. So yeah, just take 2 minutes break there just to kind of process, because I know it's a lot of information. Okay, so yeah, look, that was all about the kind of hoarding of different resources, but then there's ways to kind of interact with them within reference managers as well. And I do just want to show you some of the opportunities for note making within Zotero, because that actually links into the way that we then work with it to write in Word. So you might have noticed before when I was trying to find out about who the author was of that particular article, Philip Baker, I double clicked on it and it opened up a journal article, and you can see that you can open several journal articles within Zotero, and I really like that, rather than going off to Adobe and viewing them separately and having to switch between different windows. This is all happening within Zotero. And another reason that that's really positive, it means that any annotations that you make on that PDF are actually stored again within Zotero. So we'll have a look at how we can do that. So here is our article. And it might be that we want to do a little bit of highlighting. So we can either do that directly from here or from this little menu in the center of the PDF viewer in the central pane there. So I can highlight that. I'm going to choose, yellow, we'll stick with that. And then I can just select something and highlight it. And then you'll notice on the left-hand side, it starts collating all your kind of annotations. So you can begin to see what you've got, and you can see it gives you the page number. So again, this is saving you time in terms of how you actually take your notes as well. And it makes sure that when you come to cite something, you've actually got all the specific data you need. You don't have to worry about where in the article you found that really useful thing. So highlighting is really good. You can also add a post-it note. And we could say, you know, and we can just start adding our notes that way. We can add tags within that as well. So if we want to tag our notes, we can do that in the same way that we would tag individual annotations that we make. Now on the right hand side, you'll see there's another note making pane here. We can add a note that we want to write ourselves, or we can add our notes from our annotations. So if I start clicking on that, you'll see that everything I've collected in my left-hand pane starts to appear in my right-hand pane. And that is important because those notes are searchable from within Word. So if you start taking some notes within this, and you can see that there's a really developed text editor here. It works just like it would in Word. You can, make sure that something's bulleted, or you can put it in bold. We can add in some useful notes. And in this case, I'm just copying something that I've seen in there. But if these were my own words, then I've got them cited there. I can also add in the citation. Is this what am I looking at here? And I can make sure that the citation is imported. But equally, I could add in, if this made me think of another article that I'd read recently, I could then put that in as well. So I could say, oh yeah, actually that links really, really well to another article that I read. And then you could put that citation in as well. So again, lots of little ways just to kind of connect up what you've been reading, connect up your particular thoughts. It's also got a really nice little feature, which is like taking a kind of snapshot. So if we go back to this central pane in the middle of the viewer and select an area, I can select like a table or a graph or something that isn't easily highlighted. And you can see on the left-hand side, again, that has been added in as something that I've stored. So if I wanted to import that and cite that directly in my work, I've got that option as well. So lots and lots of ways of taking notes, and then those notes are stored as well on here. So if we go down to that article, Unity, there we go. We can see my annotations appear as kind of a separate folder. So it's storing stuff really nicely for me. Like I said, I don't have my notes in one place and the PDF in another. Excuse me. Right, okay, we will now open up Word and look at how this whole thing integrates with the actual writing process. So when you download Zotero for desktop, you will get this little extra bit in your menu ribbon at the top here. So we can start writing away, and I'm afraid I'm not a good enough touch typer to write anything meaningful at this stage. But when I'm ready to cite somebody, I can click on Zotero on the menu tab. Just give it a second to come back to life. I think this menu's got in the way. There we go. Okay. So when I want to add in a citation, it's a really, really simple menu, as you can see. Just click on Add or Edit Citation. And I need to type in here a word that is either maybe the author's surname, it might be something from the title. So remember that one we were just looking at, which was Unity. And there it is, Unity in Diversity. And then I'm going to cite that. Now it might be that I remember that that was on a particular page. I could go back and check, or I could just remember that maybe it was page 556, for example. And I can add that in. And there you can see a citation has appeared already. I might then want to add in another citation. In this case, it was page 3 maybe, and it might even be that I was going to refer to this article and say, Hicks makes a really important point in their seminal article about the value of information literacy. So I might not actually want Hicks to appear in the actual reference itself. So if I add that in, oops, there we go. So there you go. If I said, Hicks said something, then I can change the way that the citation appears. Now, I mentioned before that there are lots and lots of different referencing styles, and it might be that, like I said, you need to change this, or it might be that you want to stick to one, but you can do it at the flick of a button. So we could change to Chicago, and you can see it just slightly orders the way things look. We could change it to so let's see if there's another one, Vancouver. And that would change it to a footnoted style that when I add in my bibliography, they would all appear in a particular way. And so this is quite a nice way to show you what the bibliography looks like. I can add in my bibliography again. I don't have to type anything. It's just going to do it automatically. So again, if we change our document preferences and go back to MHRA, you can now see we've got footnotes here, and that our bibliography is done sort of alphabetically rather than in the order in which we cite particular things. So it's really, really flexible, and you can change it to a style that you're interested in or that your department demands that you write something in. It's also infinitely updatable. So if I think, actually, this second section, that whole bit about Alison Hicks, I don't really want that anymore. I'm going to delete that. If you just click on refresh, it should refresh, and then it will remove things from your bibliography. So you don't have to worry about keeping on top of whether or not your citations and your bibliography agree with one another. We can also add in our notes as well. Do you remember that note I made about saying something was really interesting? I want to add that in. And then I could add that in. It's slightly changed my formatting there, so I would just need to go back and just make sure that that was normal text. That's fine. I actually don't want that little bit. So you can see I can work with things. I can add things in. We can change the way that multidisciplinary care came in. So, you would obviously want to work with this in a way that your notes were nicely curated, so you knew what you were importing. But you can see how actually, if you start doing some pre-writing within Zotero in your notes section, then actually you can then just bring that into Zotero really, really easily as well. Okay, so that's quite a lot of information. There's quite a lot of chopping and changing, knowing where to click. And so I appreciate it takes a little bit of time to get used to that. I'm going to stop sharing for now. And just give you an opportunity. We are going to be here for the next 15 minutes. If you want to try and install Zotero, have a play with it, or you just want to kind of look at some of the options. Actually, I'm very briefly going to reshare, and I'm just going to show you our LibGuide. So lots of you might be familiar with this already, but under managing research and references and reference management, we've got a couple of little videos that show you kind of where to click and just to kind of how to do the basics and to get things in, how to make it sync up with Word. If you're interested in any of those note-making functions, Harvard University has got some really, really great notes and detailed notes on how to do that and how you can integrate them and kind of how to get the most out of those notes features. So I've put a link into those there as well. We've got a few suggestions for how you might want to get started if you can't quite remember the order in which you need to do everything. But like I said, do just get in touch with Connor or myself. We'd be really happy just to sit with you and get that set up. But I think the earlier you do it, the better. I have had lots of people coming to me saying, "Oh, I'm submitting, in 2 weeks' time. How do I use Zotero?" And it's just too late at that point. You really need to kind of get started as soon as possible because it would be too much of your time to kind of retrospectively go back through. So I will stop talking now. We'll hang around for a little bit longer, ask if you've got any questions. Otherwise, thanks very much for coming today, and we hope it's been helpful and it's given you some good ideas for kind of where to go next with your research.